What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Modern Warfare. And in today's episode, we're going to be covering the second shotgun, and this is the R9-0. Now first up, as always, let's have a look at the damage. Now just like with all of the other shotguns in the game, there's a very unique sort of a damage system that they use, and this is, we have a base amount of damage that you deal per pellet, depending on the range, and then on top of that, we get an additional damage boost for every 2 pellets that hit. Now finally, for headshots, they have a very small but pretty much negligible boost to your damage. Generally speaking, you don't want to bother aiming for the head with shotguns, just because it doesn't help all that much, and if you are aiming for the head, you're more likely to miss pellets. With the R9-0 specifically, our maximum damage that we can deal at point blank range, assuming every single pellet hits, is 204. Then, at the longest ranges that you're able to get a hit with the R9-0, assuming you're just hitting 1 pellet, the minimum amount of damage you can deal is 18. As for our rate of fire, this is one of the most interesting aspects of the R9-0. With this, we actually have basically like a 2-round burst, although it is semi-automatic, so if you just hold the trigger, you will only fire 1 shot. But we basically get a 2-round semi-automatic burst, and between these first 2 shots that you fire, we get a rate of fire of 600 rounds per minute. Then, after you fire those first 2 shots, we get a delay until we can fire our next shot, and this delay is 500 milliseconds. So a big thing to keep in mind with this is you always want to try and enter a fight with an even number of shells in your gun. And the reason we want this is if you enter a fight with an odd number of shells in the gun, if you get a hit marker on your first shot, then you have to wait for that delay until the next shot is ready to go. Whereas if you have an even number to start with, then you get that 2-round burst that you can fire quite quickly. So I always recommend after a fight where you get a 1-shot kill, either fire that second shot anyways, or quickly reload another shell back in the gun, so you're back up to an even number of shells going into your next fight. Now, what this means for our minimum time to kill values is obviously if we get a 1-shot kill, it's going to be a 0 millisecond time to kill. However, if we need to take that second shot, assuming we had an even number of shells to begin with before that fight started, our time to kill is going to be 200 milliseconds. However, if we entered that fight with an odd number of shells and we need a second shot, it's now going to be a 700 millisecond time to kill, which is extremely slow. Now, the reason it's 700 milliseconds and not 500 is you add the burst delay to the fire time of the previous shot, so that's why it adds up to 700 milliseconds, which we definitely want to avoid. As for our ranges, as you can see here, we don't have a very good 1-shot kill potential with the R9-0. It's less than 5 meters, and therefore generally you just want to be always getting in the habit of double tapping your enemy with this, unless you're playing hardcore, of course. But another interesting thing I wanted to point out is our maximum hit potential is 21 meters, and even at that 21 meters, as long as you're hitting enough pellets, you still have the potential of getting a 2-shot kill with the R9-0, although at that point, it's going to be fairly rare, especially with a moving enemy, because you have to hit basically all of your pellets. And in a real gunfight, that's generally not going to happen. So a big thing to be aware of is the further you get away from your target, the more likely you'll need that 3rd shot. However, the potential is always there to get a 2-shot kill as long as you can hit your enemy. As for our muzzle attachments, both the monolithic suppressor and the choke increase our ranges by 7.5%, which for our 1-shot kill potential, this is basically negligible. You won't even notice this at all. But for our maximum hit potential, it does add a little bit there. And finally, with the lightweight suppressor, this reduces our range values by 25%, which when it comes to our 1-shot kill potential, it's hardly noticeable. However, it is very noticeable for our maximum hit potential with this gun. Next up, I want to have a look at Hipfire, and as you can see here, it has the 2nd widest Hipfire spread out of all of the shotguns in the game. Additionally, just like with all of the other shotguns, when you aim down sight with this, it does tighten your pellet spread a little bit, although with the R9-0, it's very inconsistent. I was able to measure a roughly 20 to 30% decrease to your pellet spread while aiming down sight. However, you can really clearly see the inconsistency there. So aiming down sight with this shotgun doesn't help a ton, but if you really are trying to stretch that range out, it will be helping you a little bit, and therefore I'd still recommend it at those medium to longer ranges for this shotgun. Getting into our aim down sight time, this is 334 milliseconds, which is very slow, but actually a little bit faster than some of the other shotguns out there. And our sprint out time is also not really all that great at 300 milliseconds for our standard sprint out time and 400 milliseconds for our super sprint out time, or our tactical sprint out time. As for our capacity, we can hold 14 shells in the gun with 28 in reserve, and our reload time is very unique with this gun. So the way this works is the first shell you put in is going to take a little bit longer at 0.82 seconds. Then for every shell after that, it actually alternates. Every second shell will reload in 0.32 seconds, and then all of the others reload in 0.67 seconds. So just like when you're shooting this gun, for every 2 shells, there will be a delay. As for sleight of hand, this just speeds up all of the values. So your first shell that you put in, this is sped up. Then when you alternate here, there's less of a delay on the second shell that you put in. So it alternates between 0.3 and 0.4 seconds per shell. But with that, this brings us into the movement speed, which is 95%, which is the same as the assault rifles in this game. It's not incredibly fast, but it's also not slow by any means. Our aim down sight strafe speed, on the other hand, is quite slow at 55.5%. It's not really beneficial to be aiming down sight and strafing around a corner or strafing side to side in a fight. And that pretty much covers it for the base stats of the R9-0, but now let's move into the attachments. And first up, as always, let's cover the barrel attachments. The first one we have access to with this gun is the Forged Tack Sentry barrel, and with this one we get a 10% increase to our damage range, which really isn't that noticeable when it comes to our one-shot kill potential, but you can kind of see that difference when it comes to our total hit potential. On top of that, we get a tighter aim down sight spread, which, as you can see here, you can see just how inconsistent our aim down sight spread is with the R9-0. In my tests, it actually looks like you get worse spread with this while aiming down sight, but that's just due to the fact that this is so inconsistent when it comes to our aim down sight spread. As for the downside of this barrel, it reduces our aim down sight speed a little bit. By just 1 frame at 60 FPS, our new aim down sight time is 350 milliseconds. So overall, looking at this barrel, it hardly has any effect whatsoever on this gun. It's barely even noticeable. As for the only other barrel we have access to with the R9-0, this is the Forged Tack Gemini, and with this one, it's basically just the reverse of the previous one. So instead of increasing our range by 10%, we reduce it by 10%, which again, hardly even noticeable. It's such a small reduction to an already short range. And on top of this, it says we have a wider aim down sight spread, which once again, you can see just how inconsistent this is with this gun. One of those spreads actually looks a little bit tighter than without this barrel, even though it's supposed to widen it. So yeah, these barrels don't really seem to have a noticeable impact whatsoever. As for aim down sight speed, this is improved by 1 frame at 60 FPS, so our new aim down sight time is 317 milliseconds. So just like with the previous barrel, my conclusion on this is you'll hardly notice a difference either way. You could honestly take it or leave it, you probably wouldn't notice much of a difference anyways. As for the next attachment I wanted to look at, this is the choke attachment, and with this one, we do get a tighter pellet spread, and this is actually noticeably tighter and a lot more consistent, so it absolutely does help in this area by a very noticeable amount. And on top of this, like we saw earlier, this increases our range by 7.5%, which is pretty much negligible anyways when it comes to our one-hit kill potential, but it's worth noting. And the only downside to this is we lose 1 frame to our aim down sight speed. Our new aim down sight time is 350 milliseconds with this. So when it comes to being able to deal damage more consistently at range, the choke is actually the most beneficial attachment you could be using in those situations. As for the next set of attachments, let's get into the lasers, and with the 1 milliwatt laser, this improves our sprint out times, and our standard sprint out time is reduced down to 250 milliseconds, which is a really nice improvement, and then our tactical sprint out time is cut down to 334 milliseconds, which again, that's a very nice improvement here. Getting into the next laser though, this is the 5 milliwatt laser, and with this one, we get a massive reduction to our sprint out time all the way down to 167 milliseconds, which is significantly faster. It's almost twice as fast as our normal sprint out time. And we see a similar story with our tactical sprint out time, a really big reduction here. On top of this, with the 5 milliwatt laser, our hip spread is reduced by about 12.5%, which is a nice little reduction. It's not too extreme to the point where you have to be way too accurate then with your shot while hip firing. It just tightens that spread up really nicely. The only downside to this one though, over the previous one, is the enemies will be able to see that green laser as long as you're not aiming down sight or sprinting. Now moving into the ammunition tab of attachments, first up we have the tube extensions, which will give us an additional 4 rounds in the tube, and therefore our new capacity is 18 rounds rather than 14. And it states this reduces our aim down sight speed, which according to my tests at 60 FPS, there is no measurable change here. However, our overall movement speed is reduced by about 2% while using this attachment. And with that, this finally leaves us with the last attachment I'm going to be covering today, and this is the Slug. And if you're using a Slug, you actually increase your one-shot kill potential all the way up to 10 meters. However, that only applies if you hit the enemy in the upper torso or the head. If you hit them in the stomach or the legs, for instance, it will still be a 2-shot kill. Generally speaking, I don't feel this gun is well suited to using the Slug attachment, and I would much rather use the standard buckshot. And that finally covers it for all of the unique attachments that I wanted to cover in today's video. So now it's time to get into some of my favorite attachment combinations with this gun. Keep in mind, with the R9-0, there are very few attachments that have any kind of significant impact on this gun. With the exception of the laser sights, pretty much anything goes, and it's really not going to change the performance of this gun all that much. Like, if you asked me to pick any gun in the game and I had to use it with no attachments, it would probably be the R9-0 because it performs almost exactly the same with attachments as it does without attachments. But in either case, let's get into my more aiming down sight type of a build. With this one, the keys are, we've got the choke on there, which is going to help us get much more consistent 2-shot kills out to longer ranges due to that significantly tighter pellet spread. And the 1 milliwatt laser is also great with this, just to help with our sprint out time in the situations where we don't have time to aim down sight and we just need to hipfire an enemy up close while coming out of sprint. And the reason we're using the 1 milliwatt rather than the 5 milliwatt on this particular build is we just don't want that visible green laser. As for all of the other attachments, they basically just give a very slight bonus to various areas. They're not necessary by any means, but we've got the Forged Tack Century Barrel, the F-Tac Close Quarters Pro Pump, which is basically the same as an aim down sight stock, so it helps you aim down sight slightly faster, and then the Stippled Grip tape for our rear grip. So this particular setup is nice and balanced in my opinion. It's great if you need to aim down sight to stretch your range a little bit, but of course it also holds its own just fine while hip firing up close. As for the second build I wanted to share with you guys, this one's really designed to specialize at hip firing. It's not really meant to be aimed down sight very often, and with this we're using the monolithic suppressor so we can stay off the radar when the enemies have a UAV up. We've once again got that Forged Tack Century Barrel just because why not? It doesn't really hurt the gun at all. Then we've got the 5 milliwatt laser on this one because it is designed to be a hip-fire build and we want a really fast sprint out time and the tightest possible hip-fire spread. Then for our perks, I actually put frangible disabling on this. And the reason I'm using this is as long as one of those pellets hits the enemy in the leg region, which it's fairly easy to do if you're going to be hip-firing somebody, it will give them a stun effect and it will also stop them from being able to tack sprint so you can catch up with an enemy, for instance, if they're tack sprinting and you're trying to chase them. And then finally, just to top that all off, we've got the Stippled Grip tape, mainly just because I didn't see a need for any other attachments on there, and this is going to help you even more with your sprint out time. And with that, that pretty much covers it for the gun guide on the R9-0 shotgun. As for my thoughts on this shotgun, I think it's great. I think it's excellent. I really enjoy using it. It doesn't really rely heavily on any attachments, which is a positive in my eyes. And in Warzone as well, it's very solid because with this, up close, you have the potential to get a quick 2-tap on an enemy that has full health and full armor because you can deal up to 408 damage within just 200 milliseconds, which is awesome. The only real downside to the shotgun though is it's really difficult to stretch the range out at all even when you aim down sight due to that extremely inconsistent aim down sight pellet spread. But of course, that's just my opinion. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the R9-0 shotgun? Do you think it's a good shotgun, bad shotgun, or basically just average? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.